Welcome back to Turn Down for What, your source for EV news and updates. Like and subscribe for more content like this episode. Let's dive on in. Welcome back to Turn Down for What. Another day, another episode, as I always say. So today we have the unique privilege of having Chris on the line. Chris, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
So, Chris, you work for, and I don't want to botch this. Is it Sona? Sona
That's
Energy,
right.
correct? Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and kind of how what you operate on a daily basis.
Yeah. My official title at Sona Energy Solutions is VP of Business Operations, and that's a little vague intentionally because I like doing a little bit of sales, operations, project development, design. I like being the guy people come to when they have a problem that they need to solve, and I like working with the team to solve that.
Awesome. So, I mean, obviously, energy solutions. I think from what I was, so from the the information I have, looks like you kind of are a full scale solution when it comes to energy options. It's not just strictly. It looks like one field or the other. Um, per your website, I think you tackle pretty much solar, lighting, and the whole shebang. You want
Yeah.
to tell us more about that specifically?
Yeah. In an ideal world, we have customers who come to us with energy problems that they need solved, and then we help craft a solution, and then we implement that solution.
Gotcha.
And so, from a marketing perspective, that can be anything, whether it's renewable energy, energy efficiency, or electric mobility. In practice, the majority of our business to date has been LED lighting retrofits. And then, as the lowest hanging fruit, everyone I think is aware that lighting retrofits are the best bang for your buck from an uh, commercial, industrial, building energy opportunity. And what we find is that's kind of like the gateway drug is once you get in helping them with their lighting, now you're better positioned to help them with procuring solar or installing EV charging stations. So that's kind of the life cycle that we shoot for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity in those spaces, especially with the inefficiencies of some businesses and industries as far as money savings just for doing some of those basic things. But obviously, when you start to getting renewables and things, it's just a matter of use case and what the value is. One of the things that we've looked at with our model is, for charging stations specifically, has been the renewable energy because of the cost of energy, but we've spoken to several businesses and entities that are currently existing outside of renewables, and they're actively exploring ways to figure out how to recoup some of the expenses because these power bills and with power
Yeah.
demand and all of the issues that we're having with grid in certain areas, you're seeing some pretty crazy demand charges and peak fees, and it makes it very hard for a business that consumes a lot of power to make those things operate. So definitely something where energy efficiency plays a significant role as part of the operations from HVAC to windows to
Yeah.
lighting. So definitely get that. And obviously, here at Turn Down for What, and with Jesse and I, with what we do, we obviously are excited about the EV charging infrastructure and kind of what is done around that. So, what have you guys been doing in this space, and what
Yeah.
excites you in the EV charging space?
Yeah. So let's see. We first started our first event focused on EV charging, I think, was in 2021. We went to the National Apartment Association show because we thought and still think that multifamily is a great use case for EV charging. And our initial foray, and we still do a little in multifamily, but it's incredibly challenging to figure out, at least on the East Coast, how we make profit doing EV charging in multifamily because I think the thing I find myself saying on a near daily basis is EV charging is just more complicated than people not familiar with it want to believe. There's so much that goes into it, largely due to the relatively high amounts of power flowing through the chargers and how that manifests itself when you do site audits and development of the site. So, next week I'm working with a contractor. We're working with a small lawn care company that is converting from fossil fuel based lawn care to electric lawn care, all the way from the truck that gets them there to the lawn equipment itself is all going to be electric.
Very cool.
And so he already has one 4D Transit, and I think he has 4 more on order. And he has one charger, but he's like, well, how am I, going to scale my future chargers? And it's challenging because he subleases the commercial space, and it's fed by a 90 amp breaker. It feeds his whole commercial space.
Yeah, that is
And
a
so,
pickle.
yeah, and a lot of these chargers, use 40 amps, which require 60 amp breakers. So if you have two 48 amp charger, you're consuming, basically the entire capacity that he has. And that kind of situation manifests itself on nearly every type of job. And so it's just the amount of time and effort that goes into designing a system that works. And then what we have seen a lot of the times, and that's obviously changing as time goes on and EV adoption increases, but you put all this time and effort into coming up with a solution, and you give it to a property manager, because you're almost always interfacing with the property manager, and the property manager says, okay, great, we'll take it to the owner. And then a month goes by and you follow up and they're like, oh yeah, the owner's not going to do it this year, maybe next year. And that has been our experience time and time again in multifamily, and that you do all this time and effort to present a project, and then it doesn't get approved, and you're kind of kicked on to the next year. So I say all that to say that in a lot of cases on level 2, EV charging, well, whether we're talking about fast charging or level 2, it's expensive, and it can be an investment, and you have to be working with clients who understand what that investment brings to them. So since then, we still, I was just on another level 2 fleet discussion where we're working more on an installation only basis, but we've also pivoted to doing DC fast charge, both for selling turnkey projects to retail customers. If the retail customer doesn't want to own the chargers themselves, we have started to become a charge point operator where we will own and operate the equipment. So our first station went live in December. That's at a Wendy's out in Littleton, Colorado. And we have 2 120 kW chargers. And yeah, we're working on operating those and ensuring reliability and all the fun challenges that come with operating retail chargers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, obviously there's a lot to kind of unwind in that, and definitely something that I think we'll take what you just said and kind of break it into a couple segments. But first, with the level 2 network, dealing with businesses and corporations like you were doing, what I mean, outside of financing, what are you seeing as being the best opportunity to end up getting a consumer to actually acquire those systems? Incentives, grants, tax credits, outside of just wanting to electrify, is there specific things that you can say to a business owner that, hey, we can get you these type of things through these tax credits? Like I know with solar, the conversation is, hey, you can get X amount in rebates through the tax credits. And so a lot of people utilize that to justify some of that investment capital. Is there, from your experience, what is the best use cases for the businesses to use to get the max benefit out of some of these systems?
Sure. So in my experience, I've found that tax credits are harder to help justify projects. Like it's icing on the cake if the person really wants to do it. But oftentimes people in my position are interfacing with someone like a building construction or facility maintenance or facility operations. And those people have different pains and priorities that are different than the people who care about the tax credits, right? And the way to think about that as compared to solar is, if you think about what solar does for a building, its main purpose is essentially to lower energy costs, right? There aren't a lot of qualitative or quantitative aspects that solar brings to a facility aside from lowering energy costs. And of course, you get the green marketing benefits, but it's basically a financial decision, and it's typically run through the CFO or the financial suite of an organization. And I say that because if you're in facility maintenance or operations, it doesn't really impact your day to day if you have solar or not, right? But if you're in facility maintenance or operation and your lights aren't turning on, that impacts your day to day, right? If you're getting a fleet of electric vehicles and you have to charge them, you need EV chargers. You can't pretend to have EV chargers. You have to have EV chargers. So that impacts your day to day. And so I say all that, and you know, I'm probably going off on what could be a tangent, but I think everything we do, we have to look at what are the actual use cases and what are the pains and problems that we're solving. And so the tax credit is nice, but oftentimes our main contact is more concerned of just how's this going to get installed and how are we going to get the initial cost down, because the tax credit is realized if it can be realized, which is up to the different types of businesses. It's realized, you know, a year down the road. So to
What
more
you're saying
directly
is
answer your question,
what you're saying is the cost benefit is usually based on basically lowering fuel costs and some of the savings that the business has by electrification, and not as much around the structure of the physical charging infrastructure.
well, you know, to more directly answer your question, my favorite type of incentive to help sell these projects are utility make-ready incentives. So I'm a bigger fan of those than even NEVI, because NEVI is a competitive grant, right? So you spend a ton of time, energy, and money into trying to win the grant, and you may not get it. Whereas utility make-ready incentives, if they're there and if the project's funded, you have a pretty good odds of getting those dollars. And so not only does that take a huge cost burden off of us, but it also takes a risk burden off of us.
Yeah.
Right. Because now that the utility's responsibility to do all the locates and to do the construction, and if they didn't locate property and they hit a water pipe, that's their problem to fix. And so it's the monetary aspect, but it's also the risk aspect that the utility takes on. So our first project in Colorado was done with Excel and their make ready program. We're doing a second project in Colorado right now that they said the transformer should be set by April. Again, it's done with make ready funding. So we don't have to bear the cost or the risk of getting that equipment installed. So those are my favorite. And then different utility make ready programs operate a little differently. There's pluses and minuses in all of them, and some will actually pay for the equipment and the install. And so those are the best of the best. So the short answer to your question is those are my favorites. So, you know, how that can apply to someone who manages a portfolio of sites listening to this podcast is if you have a nationwide portfolio of sites, what we do, you know, you here, I'm sure you guys do the same thing, is you can go through that list, match it up to the utilities and say, all right, well, let's target the utilities that offer make ready first, because that's going to, you know, cut in half the cost of installation at least. So those are definitely my favorite.
Talk about make ready at a high level, because that's not a term I'm familiar with, and I just quickly kind of Google searched it real quick. So is that a national thing, a regional thing, utility by utility? And it sounded like from what you were saying, it may, depending on the make ready program, it may cover materials or may cover materials installation. Is this typically, I think I heard you say transformer. I know transformers are taking a long time to get, main panels. Like what is it kind of at a high level? What is it?
So it typically, I think when I think make ready as a EV industry term, it's typically the scope of work in between the concrete pad that the charger sits on and the utility service. So, and some utilities will say, okay, the transformer that's serving the EV chargers, we will only cover from the utility pole to that transformer. Others will say we will cover from the utility pole all the way to the concrete pad. And that's what I think typically make ready is the utility pole to the concrete pad that the chargers sit on. Or if it's a power cabinet dispenser. So if you think about Tesla, they have the power cabinet and then they go from the power cabinet to the dispensers. Then the utility make ready says, okay, we're going to stop at the power cabinet, and then it's your cost responsibility to get power from the power cabinet to the dispensers.
This
would be
trenching. Yep. Okay.
Trenching, and then they will actually own. So on our first project we did with Excel, and I know Georgia Power operates the same way, that they own the equipment. So the power distribution equipment, the utility physically owns that. They own the conduit, they own the wire, they own the transformer. So they own everything up to where the concrete pads that the chargers sit on. So all that copper wire, the utility owns, and then they have to get easements from the property owner in order to place and install that.
And is that being funded federally? Like, what's their incentive to do this? This is just they get to sell more
Um,
power to that customer.
No, they're typically mandated by the public utility commissions. So when you ask like what type of utilities, it's typically investor-owned utilities that are regulated by the public utility commissions, and the public utility commissions are forcing them to do this, but the utilities can often rate base that work. So they're making money off of it, or they're charging the rate payers a fee on their bill. So there's a rider on the bill. So you'll have, your kilowatt hours used, your KW demand used. And at the bottom, they might say EV program charge. And it might be, on a typical residential bill, it might be, $1.50 a month or whatever. But when you have a million, ratepayers, it all adds up. They take all that money, put it in a pot, and then people who are doing EV charging projects can pull from that pot of money.
And typically, is this something where it is new projects, or is it also retrofits? So if I've got a footprint of 10 warehouses around the country that all have 20 delivery vans and they're all gas, and I decide I want to go EV on those locations, and I'm going to need a new transformer. I'm going to need to supply power to those. But that would be a retrofit, not a net new program. Does it work with both?
Yes, and in fact, I think the majority of applications are for existing buildings.
Okay.
In my understanding, but so the New York public utilities have this, Massachusetts public utilities. I know Georgia Power has it. I know Alabama Power has a program. Excel, SCE in California is coming out with one, but my experience in California is that money like disappears within a couple days or weeks. Whereas every other, like, California, as we all know, is kind of its own country when it's like an order of magnitude ahead of everywhere else.
Yeah.
When it comes to EV. So the money gets sucked up really quick, whereas in other parts of the country, the money is there and just kind of indefinitely. But those are, by far, I think the preferred way to help incentivize EV charging installations.
Yeah, there's a lot of various incentives, and what we found is sometimes by utilizing secondary incentive options, it's a little less restrictive than NEVI, because NEVI, like you said, is competitively bid, but also there's a lot of restrictions to what and how the infrastructure is put in, and those things just it costs. And luckily enough, with that type of grant process, it's mostly funded should you get awarded, but you're in a massively competitive situation.
Well,
So
and
definitely
it's also challenging because you don't get reimbursed until the project is complete. So you have to have some type of financing lined up to fund the installation, and then it might be 6 weeks or probably longer realistically before the state is going to pay the NEVI award winner back.
Yeah. That's what we're dealing with currently.
Exactly. So
yeah, that's something that with the obviously you have to have a credit line. You can get reimbursements throughout the construction process after environmental is complete, but it just takes it's an arduous process with a lot of extra paperwork and stuff that you can avoid. And the Buy America piece, I mean, that in of itself limits you to a certain number of chargers that are a lot more expensive because they have to be higher powered. And I mean, the infrastructure costs are just insane. I remember several years ago, I was talking to Jesse, and I made a comment. It was right when we were first entering the space. I made a comment like, "Oh wow, they're putting how much money towards this charger?" And then I realized like that's just the industry standard because this is such high. I mean, the cost is so high, which is tying into the second point is, level 2 obviously is much more affordable, but level 3 unincentivized is a very difficult game. We were approached by a contact who wanted us to do some infrastructure in Ohio, and the Ohio infrastructure was taking applications to put it along their turnpike, but it was 0% incentivized. And it was all like, we're going to give you a 10-year lease and you have to buy all the equipment and install it in our parking lot, and we'll give you a 10-year lease. And that's what you get with the application award. And it's like, okay, so now I have to go fund $500,000 of infrastructure and try to make money off of it in 10 years. And if at 10 years you want to kick me out, then I'm just starting to make money back at that point in time.
Exactly.
And then you're going to give us the boot to go to the next spot. And that's assuming that you could actually do the site development for $500,000. And so that's where the EV industry, we don't have enough demand to go out and do this stuff unincentivized. And so that's why programs like the NEVI and CFI and Make Ready programs, I think, have such a meaningful impact to the charging space, because it's going to encourage adoption through having more charger availability. But that's something that right now, as an EV infrastructure provider, you really have to find different incentives on level 3 in order to make it make sense. Level 2 investments.
Absolutely.
I mean, me and Jesse were commenting on the same post that you shared today that Lauren had shared. Me and Lauren were both at that expo in Vegas last week, and
it seems like everyone except me was there, I think.
I know. I was hoping to see you there, but here we are. I actually wasn't going to go until like Tuesday of last week, and then I booked the trip and went on a whim. But anyways, a level 2 system, not installed, but being less than $1,000 for a level 2 system that you can sell power through. That's very functional for a hotel to install, for a shopping center to install. Now, different locations have different use cases, and so that's where we have to figure out that scale, because I've had some people feel like we need to have superchargers at overnight stay locations and level 2s at places that people are going to stay at for 20 minutes. And it's like, there has to be a conversation on use case for all of the different charging types. And yet, with the current incentives and funding, I think that it's definitely more justifiable for a landscaping company to go put 4 level 2s in. Obviously, power grid contingent, but that's something that's much more of a justifiable expense, because a level 3 is going to be $500,000 of infrastructure. If it's a single charger, maybe $250,000. But that's something that it comes with demand charges, and it comes with all of these things that a lot of people, I don't think, really truly understand the
that's right. No, that's why it's like it's just more complicated than anyone wants to believe on the face. And I think you're right. If it can be done by a level 2, do it by level 2. But if you need the fast charge, whether if you're a fleet, you have quick turnaround times, or a combination of both, when it makes sense. Well,
the warehouse we have out here that I just visited for FedEx, we have a combination. So we'll have 60 or so AC chargers that are on a rail system up in the air, and then they drop down to the trucks. But then if you need them, we have 7 DC fast chargers. So if someone needs to come in,
plug in overnight, and then when you leave in the morning, if you need to rapidly charge again, it's there, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, the thought is 2 things. One, if for some reason, weather conditions, something, whatever it might be, mid-route, you need to come in and plug in real quick and just get a boost, you can do that. But then it's there as kind of like a backup, so that something happened overnight, your driver didn't plug in quite the right way, something errored out, a breaker tripped, a power outage. Sometimes with these chargers, if you interrupt the charge, it doesn't reinitiate the charge when power is restored. So you need to have enough chargers there that you can quickly get everybody rotating through and back in again. So it's almost like a safety measure, redundant backup that that's not your primary, but it's what you would use if something went wrong. You need to have enough there. I mean, we have jets literally flying in circles just in case another jet goes down. So there's a lot of redundancy built in when so
when you're dealing with a company like FedEx, I think it's much more important to have redundancy and backups. The average company, I think, can survive without the office charger working. But a company like FedEx, with the reliability and the demand for speed on package delivery, absolutely makes sense.
You can't explain that your entire delivery van is recharging and your packages aren't going to get there on time. You just can't that's not an option.
Your package has been delayed.
Why? Yeah, why? Because I'm charging it.
Yeah,
charging at 9 kilowatts. What do you get? That's not gonna work.
And I think that that's the kind of the beauty is, I think as this space evolves, there needs to be that multi-use case. Cause I think really what I would classify as a level 2 versus a level 3, I think every bit of the scale is going to be a different use case because we had a
Yeah.
consumer ask us to help install some they were 75 kilowatt chargers, and you would split them and they would be 32 kilowatts each, and that's a
Mm,
really unique product offering. But I feel like that charge power level is the perfect use case for like a grocery store where
yeah.
somebody's going to be there for 45 minutes to an hour and they can have a meaningful charge. But you don't want that along the interstate corridors because that's what the original intent was. We want to fill corridors with these chargers. And close to my home, we have limited infrastructure in East Tennessee along the corridors. The Nevy's about to change that. We're putting one in very close to us. But one of the closest chargers to me is at a TNA travel center, and it's a
Mm,
75 kilowatt charging unit. Well, if I'm driving down the interstate, 75 kW is not going to do anything for anybody, especially, I mean, unless you really just want to wait. But you're going to get
yeah.
60 to 65, and for my truck, which is a Lightning, is going to take 2 hours to charge. Like that's not sustainable for corridor fills. But if that same exact unit was at the Target when I went with my wife to go shopping, I would absolutely plug into it because if I'm in
Yeah.
there for an hour, I can actually have a meaningful charging session at that location. And so I think that all the way up and down, level 2s need to be at every hotel across the entire nation. And it can be
Yeah.
the 11 kilowatt sipper, or they can do the higher power 20, 25 kilowatt level 2s with a 100 amp breaker and some of the more sophisticated requirements. But that's something that, I think on a basic level, having those type of infrastructure, one of the largest, most frustrating things for me has been as a EV driver going to a location and 90% of hotels don't have charging
Mm,
chargers, which, I mean, you think, well, I mean, we're still early, but at the same time, for me, I can show up to that hotel at 0 and know the next day I can leave with a charge, which for me on an overnight trip to Nashville makes all the difference in the world because I don't have to spend 45 minutes at a charger before we left. So we were in
yeah.
Nashville. Me and Jesse were in Nashville 2, 3 weeks ago. I forgot how long ago it was. And we had to wait at a Walmart parking lot 11 o'clock at night to charge before we went to the hotel because there's no charger at the
Oh, because you
hotel.
didn't have it. Yeah.
I
It,
charged up to where I felt like I could get to a slow charger that was 3 dealerships away from the hotel. There's 3 car dealerships. And so I parked at a Mercedes dealership, plugged it into their level 2, and it would not activate because they had shut off the power to their charger.
Oh,
So
geez.
nobody would bum the power. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just, that's one of those things that there's use cases up and down the spectrum. But I think that it's something that the level 2s being spread out amongst long-term stay facilities, whether that's a office that people are at for 8 hours a day. Great use case for a good level 2, sipping on power, but you're there for a long time.
Yeah.
But the level 3 network along the interstate being filled in, it's so expensive, it has to be incentivized either through a make ready type program or NEVI. So there's my tangent.
Chris, I don't know if this is in your scope or anything you've dealt with before, but one of the things I hear a lot about, and for some reason I've heard more about recently, is this idea of curbside charging. I guess it's big in Europe, and they kind of bring in their own cable, and you plug into an outlet, and it's primarily parallel parking, it would seem, I guess. And is being in the industry the way you are and seeing the things, are there any whispers of that for North America as being a thing, or is this really just Europe that this is done in? And why?
There are.
Why don't we do it?
Someone just sent me yesterday. Gravity is a company that made a splash a couple weeks ago with they have like a 500 kW charger, and but they just announced some kind of curbside deal. But I think it is becoming more of a thing, but you still have the same challenges, but even more so, I would say, in that, where do you just getting power to that location is a challenge. And, if the utility poles are running down the street and you can do a pole mount transformer, then it might be relatively simple. But if you can't do that, where are you going to mount the charger? Where are you going to trench or bore? Where do you have your power distribution equipment? All those challenges still remain. So who's paying for that, who's going to try to profit from that, is still a thing. And so I don't know enough about the companies doing that in Europe. I would love to see their financials. I think what I've realized in the EV charging industry, a lot of times I'll look at someone, I'll be like, gosh, how are they making money? And I think that's the wrong question because a lot of times the answer is they're not. They're just someone funded an idea because they were sold a bill of goods, and there's not a viable path to profitability. And oftentimes that's kind of like Occam's razor. If you can't figure out how someone's making money, then the answer is, well, they're probably not. Or it's a grant from some program, they want to try something out, or it's a utility program, and the utilities, the ratepayers are funding it, and the utilities just spending that money. And so it is very, it all comes down to economics, right? It's like, if you're owning public fast charging stations, what it sounds like, both of our entities are looking at doing, it's like, how do you install it for as little as possible? And then how do you get as much utilization to drive revenue? And then how do you keep your energy costs down, right? So those are the three buckets: is low install costs, high utilization, low energy costs, and then obviously low maintenance costs as well, which is easier said than done.
So my question tying to that is, with your experience, obviously you're doing some networks with what seems to be better utilized locations. What we've looked at is, how do we make rural sites more profitable? Because a lot of these states giving out funding, the big metropolises and like the big more utilized locations are getting all the applications, and some states are having no applications in sites that have rural areas because there's low utilization. And so one of the things we built our model in is, how do we incorporate microgrid and some of these additional technologies to make rural sites more profitable? Because one of the things that we've studied is, can we utilize battery systems, which cost more up front, but then shave off your demand charge? Because a NEVI site is 600 kilowatts. That's a lot of money in demand charges. I mean, it's for a Tennessee site, that's $8,375 a month in demand charges. Well, in a rural area, I'm not going to sell that much power a month. And so TVA, our power authority across the 7-state region, came out with some guidance on, we can give you higher power rates with no demand charge, but then your profitability is less. So the solution to us is looking at storage solutions to single phase feed in, eliminate the demand charge, and then output from that battery in rural areas. Have you guys done anything to incorporate microgrids into the charging network, or have you kept microgrids pretty separate as of now?
We've looked at it, but I think I'm not sold on the idea of a microgrid to help improve the ROI or the unit economics of a charging location. I think where that makes the most sense is like at a FedEx facility, where someone has made a commitment to purchase X number of electric vehicles, and the utility says, hey, we can't upgrade your feeder to give you 3 megawatts of power that you're going to need for another 4 years. And so then it's like, okay, we have to bring in a microgrid to physically supply the power we need. That's when I think it makes sense. I think it's just such a speculative play right now on the economics behind microgrids to improve the ROI of like public DC fast charging. I think in the future possibly, but I've spoken with a couple of battery companies. I'm like, great, can you show me a financial pro forma with and without your battery? And then it's kind of like crickets. They're like, oh, wow. no, not really. And it's like, well, if you don't have it, then I can help you create it. You need to create it if you want to have a sales tool. But I think oftentimes, going back to what I said of like, my assumption is that they're in existence to help improve the economics, but that's not always the case, right? So they may not have it because they know it's not going to be favorable for them, just because batteries are too expensive and it's not just the hardware cost. It's like, now your engineering expenses are greater, your insurance expenses are greater, your installation expenses are greater. So all in, if you're not doubling the cost of that site, you're getting pretty darn close by adding that battery. And so then that battery has to recoup it. So it becomes a real challenge. And it's, the hard part about anything energy is, if you like, let's say we figure out and you figure it out in Tennessee, or, I'm in Atlanta, I have a model that works here. Well, if I go to a different state, if I go across state lines, or if I go across the street and that is a different utility than the one, like, so in Atlanta, Georgia Power serves the majority of the metro region, but when you get out of that, there's over 20 different municipals and co-ops. And so they all have different programs and rate schedules. And so I could figure it out for Georgia Power, but if I go across the street and it's a different municipal or co-op, that model that I spent a lot of time and effort creating goes out the window, and right, it's back to square one.
Thanks for tuning in to part 1 of our conversation with Chris Kaiser of Sona Energy. Tune in next week for part 2 of this conversation and listen in as we discuss more about grid protections and how to manage the increased load with more EV adoption. As always, like and subscribe for more content. See you next week.